Well, next, the first week of December is always full of video game hype, and this week was no exception. The trailer for Grand Theft Auto 6 broke YouTube records by racking up almost 100 million views in just 24 hours. And the Game Awards, the Oscars of gaming, they've just wrapped up in LA after more than 3 hours of prizes and announcements. Well, for more, I'm joined in studio now by our tech editor here at France 24, Peter O'Brien. Peter, you stayed up all night to watch this ceremony for us. Why?
That's a really good question, Sharon. I'm not really sure why, and actually it dragged on. If you include all the sort of stuff they put on before the actual ceremony starts, it was more than 3.5 hours. And I guess I had a kind of morbid curiosity, right? Because Jeff Keighley has jumped ship 10 years ago from Spike Video Game Awards, which was the predecessor to these Game Awards. And that's because it was incredibly cringe and a total car crash. Now, he's been running this rather successfully for 9 years now, and I was looking at the streaming figures yesterday. I mean, well over 1 million people were tuned in to watch this live. So it's doing very, very well. And at points, I did ask myself, why? Because it still has a heavy dose of cringe. Like, there are some things that they're doing very well, but also, I guess with all award ceremonies, there's going to be cringe moments. But what I found kind of sad in a way was that a lot of the awards were just completely rushed through. And it basically became a 3-hour ad marathon. I mean, okay, a lot of the ads were, we hadn't seen that game before, it was new content or whatever. But really, you got the sense that it wasn't about the speeches, it wasn't really about developers, it was about what was coming next, which I found a little bit sad. And I can see why, because E3, gaming's previous headline yearly event, was cancelled this year, and many are saying it's dead. So I can see why now the Game Awards has become this sort of, has taken up the mantle. But I thought it was also a shame that it doesn't really reflect the reality of the gaming industry as it stands. No mention of the mass layoffs there have been. And there have been huge amounts of layoffs this year, even worse than last year. And I think, you know, it's all well and good to gloss over this stuff and run a load of ads, but really, if it's the only headline event about gaming, it should really reflect the reality in some ways.
We do commend your perseverance for sticking with it, Peter. Was there anything at all to get excited about in that marathon? Yeah,
of course there was, Sharon. I mean, OD was one game which was announced by Hideo Kojima. He's absolute gaming royalty behind Metal Gear Solid and Death Stranding. He came on stage with Jordan Peele, of all people, the director of Get Out, to announce this game, which is a horror game, supposedly a mix between a film and a video game and an experience. And as you can see from the pictures, hopefully, that these are not real faces, these are actually animated faces. So you can see the kind of budget he's putting into doing something very experimental. Here you can see a little peek into what Arcane Studios are cooking up. That's a Lyon-based studio that's developing a new Marvel superhero game based in Paris on the character Blade. And I love to see these two games, Dredge and Dave the Diver, two indie games that were brilliant, had huge success this year, both on a nautical theme. They're coming together to do a crossover next week. Now, as for the actual prizes, when I was looking over the sort of shortlist, I was at first a bit disappointed because we saw a lot of direct sequels and a lot of reboots, right? So you had Spider-Man 2, Resident Evil 4, which is a reboot of an old game. You had Super Mario Brothers Wonder. It's a great game, but it's a formula that's been done over and over and over. And dare I say, the new Zelda Tears of the Kingdom, it's based on the same map as the previous one. So I was happy to see then Alan Wake 2 and Baldur's Gate 3 really clean up with Baldur's Gate, which is based on Dungeons & Dragons, the RPG, that won Game of the Year, and for good reason, because they're both fantastic games in their own right. They're not just sequels or reboots. And special mention as well to the orchestra. I mean, that was a brilliant touch, actually. They revamped a lot of the music in the top games this year, and it worked really well.
Peter, you're speaking directly to the uninitiated here, but for you, what's your personal game of the year?
Well, I have to give a shout out for my game of the year, which was Tears of the Kingdom. I mean, it didn't do so well. It only got one award at this Game Awards, which I think a lot of people will be a bit hurt by, because it's a fantastic adventure game. But I wanted to point our viewers in the direction, and perhaps people at France 24, into the direction of this game called Not for Broadcast. Now, this wasn't out this year, but I played it this year, so I'm going to sneak it in there in my list. You play as someone in the control room of a TV channel that's falling apart in a country that's sliding towards populism and tyranny. And it's a brilliant satire. It's incredibly well written. It's so original. I've never played anything like it before. So I couldn't recommend Not for Broadcast highly enough, Sharon.
We'll try and check that out before the end of the year. Peter, thank you so much for joining us. That was very enlightening. Our tech editor here at France 24, Peter.
You're welcome.